Dust swirled under Arizona's merciless sun. But Mary Hale sold her only daughter to save her last breath. She stood on the wind-blown porch of Eli Tanner's lonely ranch house, grit and sage choking every breath. In her gaunt hand, she held a tarnished silver coin in a heart-shaped wooden locket, carved with sage leaves and etched in faded ink, *, my heart with yours. * Mary's fever. Worn voice trembled as she pressed him into Eli's callous palm. Promise you'll give her life? She whispered, lips cracked like dry earth. I cannot. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. Lila Hale, 9 years old, watched from Mary's skirts, wide eyes the color of desert sky. She felt each grain of dust braid into her gown's hem as her mother knelt before the rancher. Mary's pale fingers wrapped around Lila's wrist. Her voice broke. He'll care for you better than I can. He has land, water, horses. Lila's heart wrenched at the thought of leaving Mother's side. Yet when Mary's gaze flicked upward, aching pride spliced with sorrow, Lila understood this was beyond barter. It was sacrifice. Eli Tanner stood silent as a mesquite stump, weathered by years without laughter. He bowed once, voice soft as cedar smoke. I'll keep her safe. His boots sank into the cracked boards. He fingered the coin's rim, then lifted the wooden locket, studying its carved loops. The locket swung in his palm like a pendulum marking fate's toll. Lila pressed against her mother, tears carving silent tracks. Mary wiped her daughter's cheek and touched the embroidery on Eli's vest, a gesture of trust stitched into memory. With a final shudder, Mary released Lila's hand. Lila's small palm lingered on her mother's cold fingers before slipping into Eli's. She climbed onto Eli's dark sorrel mare, Dust, whose flanks gleamed with sweat and promise. Mary swung her shawl to dry her eyes, breathing sage and dust. She watched as Dust carried Lila across the parched yard toward cottonwood shade. Mary's frail silhouette faded behind the ranch house's rough plank walls. The journey to the barn loft stitched Lila's fear into her bones. Eli guided Dust beneath a rusted windmill creaking like a widow's sigh. He led the mare to a corral echoing with hens' clucks and the scrape of wood, splintered fences. Lila's small boots pounded on hardened soil as Dust nickered. Eli dismounted and offered his hand. Stay near, he said, voice low as creek water through rock. Lila stepped forward, clutching the locket to her chest, heart a drumbeat of longing and dread. Inside the barn's cool shadows, Eli unlatched the loft door and lifted Lila onto a pallet of straw. He spread a woven blanket, turquoise threads dancing in the low dusk light. Lila's fatherless memories stirred. Her mother's gentle lullabies hummed behind her eyelids. She touched the blanket's loops, lungs catching at unexpected warmth. Dust's hoofbeats faded as Eli turned back to his chores, brushing the mare's flank and fetching oats in a zinc pail. Lila watched his broad back, strength carved in saddle leather and spurs. When the lantern's glow dimmed at nightfall, Lila curled into the woven blanket's folds. She cradled the wooden locket against her heart, tracing the sage leaf design with chapped fingertips. Straw tickled her arms, the smell of hay curling around her like a lullaby. Eli stepped inside with a tin cup of watered-down milk. He set it beside her without a word. Mercy served in silence. Lila sipped, warmth spreading in her chest. She dared a glance at Eli's dark silhouette against the barn slit of moonlight. At dawn, rooster crows cut through canyon hush. Eli found Lila feeding hens in corral, her small hand scattering grain into dust. She paused, breath misting in chill air. He handed her a hatchet, sharpened feed scoop, and nodded. Lila watched him repair a broken rail, with measured hammer strikes, each echo a promise of protection. The morning sun glinted on his brimmed hat as he paused, fingers brushing the locket at his belt. Lila's chest eased. Trust grew in Hammer's pulse. Later, Eli guided Dust and Lila downwind, scarred trails to a hidden spring. He knelt to fill a bucket. Lila dipped her palms into cool water. She scrubbed dust from her face, inhaling cedar and sage's fragrance. Eli watched her, eyes softening beneath sun-burned lines. He handed her a cloth, which she recognized from her mother's blankets. Lila pressed it to her cheek, feeling both women's care in its weave. He tipped his hat in a silent benediction. That evening, beneath oilcloth and lantern glow, Lila carved the locket's back with shard of flint, her name and mother's initials entwined in cedar's grain. Eli watched from the barn door, silhouette framed in Hay's golden hush. He removed his hat and ran a hand through dust-matted hair, regret and resolve mingling in his gaze. Lila pressed the newly carved locket into his palm. No words came, only the steady thrum of newfound family in timber's hush. Just as the horizon bled into deepest indigo, hoofbeats rattled the corral gate, urgent drumbeats of steel and malice. Lila's heart skittered. Eli's hand brushed her shoulder, steady as canyon bedrock, then flew to the colt at his hip. Lila dashed behind him, blanket wrapped tight. Outside the fence, silhouettes rode into flickering lantern light. Ezra Cole's men, spurs glinting like broken promises. The land bare in shadow stretched across dusty rails, hunger for land and livelihood in his crooked grin. Eli lifted his colt, stance unwavering beneath moon's silver gaze. Lila pressed her cheek to his side, pulse thrumming in her ear. Ezra Cole's colt-clatter hooves in menacing rhythm. Dust-choked plains lay between rancher and thief. Lila tightened her grip on the blanket, bracing in the hush before hostility's spark. In Dusty Hollow's dusk, Eli Tanner's colt gleamed in starlight and Lila's blanket trembled in her grasp. Only courage born of sacrifice and love could stand between them and Ezra Cole's ambition as Part 2 storm gathered at the ranch gate. Sagebrush swayed under storm clouds, but Lila clutched her wooden locket as hoofbeats faded into dusk's hush. Dust-choked plains stretched beyond corral gate, cracked or thirsty for mercy. Lila pressed eyes to the horizon where Ezra Cole's men had ridden off, rifles slung and faces set in greed shadow. The carved heart in her palm warmed with memory of mother's lullabies. She watched Eli Tanner tighten his grip on Colt's grip, silhouette rigid against windmill's slow spin. In that suspended moment, she felt fear and relief braided into hope's fragile braid. Eli's colt barked twice, sending Cole's men racing beyond mesquite thickets. They flinched at each gunshot, steel's defiant scarring twilight's calm. Lila's heart fluttered as saddle-shod men retreated, hacking at chuck-up pump's handle where they jammed grit and stone. Water dribbled in mocking sputters. Eli knelt by the pump, fingers tracing blockage's grit. Lila stepped forward, shadowed by dust's gentle nicker. She pressed her palm to Eli's shoulder, silent offer of aid. He nodded, voice low as Creek's promise. "Help me clear it." Together, they pried stones from iron's throat, living breath returning in trickling rivulets. Morning found Lila mending fence boards, hammers echo through cedar posts. She knelt in sand, weaving fresh wire around slats beaten by wind's lash. Each twist held promise of boundary and safety. Eli watched from the barn's threshold, arms crossed beneath sun-faded shirt. He tipped his hat, revealing wrinkles etched by loss and years alone. Lila's small hands worked with careful patience, recalling her mother's hands coaxing herbs from earth's belly. When she finished, she tapped each nail in salute to duty. Eli exhaled, offering naught of pride, unspoken reward binding them closer than blood. Dust stood next on her chore list. Lila fetched brush and curry comb for the mare's winter coat. Dust stood patient as she stroked matted mane, each bristle surrendering to gentle pressure. Mesquite-scented sweat rose in the morning heat. Lila hummed a fragment of her mother's song, soft echo of peppergrass and mint. Eli guided Dust to a trough, filling it with water that rippled like silver worry beads. He handed Lila a cloth. Together they wiped mare's muzzle, forging trust and shared labor. Lila realized the ranch was not prison, but sanctuary molded by kindly hands. Clucks echoed from the henhouse as Lila scattered feed for feathered hens. She stooped, nesting eggs in woven basket, pale gold and fleck cream. Dawn's chill cut through her calico dress. She wrapped the blanket gifted by Eli around slim shoulders. He observed from fence line, lean figure drawn in sunrise's glow. Lila's fingers brushed the carved floret on her locket. A budding sage leaf. Each egg she gathered was promise incubated in barn's warm hush. She lifted her gaze to Eli's face, finding gentleness beneath stoic lines, and smiled in gratitude large as ranch's open sky. That afternoon, Sarah Reed rode across Rimrock on a gray mare. Her boots clicked on corral's rail as she dismounted with steady grace. She carried supplies in oilcloth satchel, flannel and flour. Eli greeted her with firm handshake. Lila hovered nearby, curiosity bright in her eyes. Sarah handed Eli a folded ledger and warned, voice low as rattlesnakes hiss. Cole and Sheriff Vance have forged deeds. They plan to claim your land through fear and false papers. Lila pressed closer, heart contracting at land's heartbeat. This patch of earth had become her world. Sarah Reed spoke of Sheriff Luke Vance's crooked oath, how he prospered under Cole's gold, rounding up settlers on false charges. Eli's face darkened, his jaw clenched beneath sunburnt whiskers. Lila watched lines of usage crease into his brow, echoes of loss she could not name, a wife's laughter stolen by fever, an infant's cradle left empty as windmill hushed. Sarah placed a hand on Eli's arm, offering flannel cloth and solidarity. Lila wrapped her locket, tied wrists around his forearm, young comfort born of whispered trust. Twilight's hush brought oilcloth lamp hung from barn beam. Lila lingered in loft's slanted light, listened to Eli's low murmurs of regret. Mary's voice, her lullaby, I hear it in every breeze. He ran fingers through dust-matted hair, eyes distant as untamed plains. Lila traced the locket's carving, sage leaf braced by heart. Her grief and is woven into this token. She pressed fingertip to the leaf's vein and felt connection pulse. In that moment, she resolved to honor Mother's legacy and help this man whose sorrow mirrored her own. Next morning, Lila fetched her tools for pump repair. She guided Eli to disassemble the battered handle, each part rusting in musty dawn air. He demonstrated careful lubrication, his hands steady with practiced motion. Lila handed him linen cloth and oil, mirroring his movements with small fingers. Water sprang forth in eager gush, life restored by teamwork's quiet symphony. She grinned as droplets spattered boots. Eli's rare smile curved beneath fading whiskers. Lila's chest swelled with purpose. She was no longer merely child sold for coin. She was helper, apprentice, heartbeat of newly minted family. That afternoon's horizon bristled with dark thunderheads. Lila climbed the corral gate to fetch dust for afternoon ride. She steadied in saddle as wind snapped mainies and rattled boards. Lightning forked distant sky, silver veins pulsing with warning. She pressed her cheek to mare's neck, eyes tracing storm's march. Eli led from ground, voice firm, keep close, storm swift on desert. Dust nickered in response. Lila patted tufted mane, breath misting in charged air. She glanced at the locket, feeling Mother's strength surge as storm's drumbeat resonated in her bones. Rain pelted mesquite leaves and staccato drumming as Lila practiced roping fence posts, lassos looped twirling overhead. She missed at first, ropes tangled in wind's furious gust. Blood rose to her cheeks. Frustration stung as hail peppered straw. Eli stepped beside her, demonstrating anchor and pull. She looped again, heart steadier, and caught post in true circle. He nodded once, pride silent thunder. Lila pressed her palm to his sleeve, eyes bright with triumph. Together, they mended fence beneath storm's fury, steel and rope woven into ward against chaos. That night, lightning fractured night's veil. Lila crawled into crib beside barn door, blanket pulled high. She held locket to cheek, cradling Mother's gift as thunder rolled like widow's grief. Eli sat by loft ladder, lantern steady in callous palm. He poured coffee in tin cups, steam curling like lost prayers. He passed one to Lila, She sipped and felt warm bloom in chest hollow. He remained silent, shoulders bowed beneath Storm's weight. Lila reached out and pressed locket into his hand. Small gift of trust returned. His fingers closed over hers. No words needed. Before sleep claimed Barnes' vigil, Lila carved a tiny sage sprig into the locket's wooden heart. Her mother's lesson etched in grain. Each cut was prayer and promise. Blood mingled with wood's warmth. She traced leaf veins with careful stroke until sun faded with glowed in lantern light. Lila laid the locket beside her on the straw. Connection sealed in carved sprig. She drifted to sleep as thunder muted the distant drum, dreaming of wind-carried lullabies across sagebrush plains. At midnight, hoofbeats thunder across corral in urgent rat-a-tat. A lantern's beam glinted beneath Storm's haze. Cole's men returned with forged deeds and malicious intent. Lila bolted upright, heart leaping against ribs. Eli sprang forward, Colt gleaming in lantern glow. Lila clutched blanket and locket, breath jagged with fear and resolve. Outside, rain-washed lantern flickered like false promise. Lila pressed her back to barn beam, eyes fixed on latch's trembling hinge, bracing for Cole's final reckoning. In Barnes' dim lantern glow, Eli Tanner's Colt brimmed with defiance, and Lila's carved sage locket throbbed with promise. Only courage born of sacrifice and love could protect him as Cole's men closed in under Storm's roar. Dawn bled over the ranch, but Lila's locket burned as hooves thundered closer. Mesquite burned like defiance against ashen sky, and the corral gate rattled in restless winds. Lila crouched behind weathered fence posts, heart drumming against ribs like distant rifles. She pressed the carved wooden heart to her cheek, memory of Mary Hale's lullaby folding around her. The first rider burst through the corral. Ezra Cole's men, sun-bleached faces hard as river stones. Eli Tanner stepped forward, Colt drawn and aim steady despite Dawn's chill. His broad shoulders square beneath canvas shirt stained by sweat and loss. Lila watched his arms shift, and she realized he would protect their fragile home with more than iron. The rider spurred forward. Eli fired once. Colt's bark ripping Dawn's hush. The horse skidded and the rider tumbled, silhouette crashing onto blood-soaked earth. Lila gasped, fleeing behind posts as steel clanged and boots splashed in mud. A second rider circled, rifle leveled. Eli took 2 paces and fired again. Shot struck the man's boot. He yelped, lurching back. A third rifle barked. Eli's sleeve blossomed red. He staggered, hand flying to torn cloth. Lila's stomach churned as she saw the welt blooming on his forearm, flesh torn and darkened with copper blood. He gritted teeth, eyes locking onto Lila's. He pointed to her slingshot, rusty but true. Lila's palms sweated. She raised a sling, looped a reverse stone, and aimed at the rider's hat. With a thwack, the stone struck metal, sending the man reeling. Dust snorted and reared near the barn. Lila sprinted to the mare, patting her flank. "Hold fast," Eli rasped, finger brushing her shoulder. Lila mounted swiftly, heart thunderous as herd hooves. She drew another stone, flicked the sling and practiced arc. Farm chores had taught her aim. The stone cracked against a rider's shoulder, knocking him to one knee. Lila swallowed, mule-braced courage weaving through fear. From a barn door emerged Sarah Reed, rifle cradle like prayer. She aimed at Cole's men, voice ringing, "Stay clear or face justice." Her shot cracked against saddlebow, sending a rider tumbling into sagebrush. The posse faltered, their assault rattled by a woman's resolve. Sarah's face glowed in dawnlight, determination carved in wind-blown hair. Together, she and Eli repelled Cole's men until corral lay strewn with overturned saddles and spent cartridges. Lila dismounted, heart pounding wild and free. She pressed a locket to her palm, beads cool against her fingertips. She saw one rider limp, saddle off, riding gear scattered near a water trough. Eli retrieved a tattered satchel. Lila peered inside. Torn paper spilled onto blood-crumbled soil, deeds forged in Cole's hand. signatures of ranchers long gone. Sheriff Luke Vance's seal lay stamped beside Cole's scrawl. Transfer of land on fear's decree. Lila's breath caught. Cole's greed was law's dark echo. Eli set aside Colt and sank to one knee, face pale beneath dawn's bruised sky. Lila knelt beside him, pressing hand to his torn sleeve. The wound seeped life's ruby truth. Eli gripped her hand, voice thick. "Help me." Lila's tears pooled as she recalled Mother's words about yarrow and sage to staunch bleeding. She pulled herbs from her satchel. Elijah's tea, Mary's final gift. Crushed leaves powdered beneath her fingers. Lila pressed a mixture to the wound, wrapping strips of cloth around his forearm. Eli's breath staggered in pain's grip. She sprinkled sage smoke above, chanting fragments of Mary's lullaby beneath his ear. Each careful knot bound flesh in mercy's weave. Eli's hand stroked her hair, thumb brushing carved stars she was about to etch. He exhaled beneath each pulse, agony mixing with gratitude. Lila whispered, voice trembling, "I'm here." Blood's copper tang turned bitter on her tongue as she tied the last knot. Eli's eyes glimmered with pride and longing, silent admittance that he needed this child as much as she needed him. He shifted toward her, wincing, and Lila pressed her forehead to his shoulder. In that hush, Mary's lullaby wove around them like cedar smoke. Nearby, Sarah and Jed Harper gathered forward deeds and loading rifle. Dust pawed earth, sensing safety's return. Lila rose, wiping tears with sleeve's edge. She stepped to the locket and pulled free a tiny file. With trembling effort, she carved a star beside the sage leaf. Each cut a prayer for hope's return. The wood's pale grain embraced a new mark, promise sealed in etched knot. Eli rose unsteadily, arm bandaged but spirit anchored. He lifted Lila into his arms. She clung to him, locket pressed to his shirt, its card, sage, and star map of his shared journey. Sarah approached, respect in her eyes, and helped Eli steady his steps toward the ranch house. Jed followed, chest puffed in silent solidarity. Lila nestled between strength and compassion, craving normalcy's return in battered silence. They reached the porch where morning sun filtered through mesquite shade. Lila pressed her cheek to Eli's chest, inhaling cedar and earth's hum. He offered a nod to Sarah, gratitude's unspoken gift, and entered his home. Lila lingered, hand on the locket, tracing Sage's leaf and Star's arm. Her small shoulders rose and fell with new resolve. This ranch, this man, this future was hers to protect. Later that afternoon, under octagonal windmill's slow creak, Lila and Eli gathered around a campfire ringed with half-buried stones. Sarah stirred stew in a cast-iron pot, steam coiling in mind's cradle. Lila fetched splinters to stoke embers, each flicker reflecting on deeds seized by greed, wounds bound by tender mercy. She pressed a locket into Eli's palm. He closed his fingers over her hand, their bond sealed in wood's grain and heart's promise. That night, after chores and supper, Lila lay in the barn loft, blanket drawn high. Eli sat at the ladder's foot, lantern haloing his bowed head. Hearing his soft murmur, Mary's lullaby and fragmented echo, Lila closed her eyes and hummed back, their voices entwining in straw's hush. She held the locket to her heart, star glinting beneath lantern's sway. At midnight, a courier's knocks rattled oak door, urgent summon from Dusty Hollow's judge. Eli's strong arm guided Lila downstairs. She followed, heart lurching with dread and determination. The courthouse awaited at dawn, ledger in hand and locket upon her chest. Outside, mesquite shadows slithered along dusty paths, promise of trial's crucible. Lila pressed her palm to Eli's bandaged arm, whispering in Dawn's hush, "Hold fast." In the hush before Dawn's verdict, a Dusty Hollow summons lay sealed with sheriff's seal, demanding that Lila Hale and Eli Tanner face a judge's wrath, testing their courage and trust in Part 4's trial by justice. The oak beams loomed like judgment in Dusty Hollow's courthouse, oilcloth banners draping between carved pillars as murmurs floated beneath high windows. Lila Hale stood at the front bench, her carved wooden locket resting against her chest beneath a ribbon bonnet. Each heartbeat echoed like a gavel's knock. Eli Tanner towered beside her, arms still bound from Dawn's attack, eyes fixed on Judge Hastings's furrowed brow. Wind-bitten mesquite slivered light across rough-hewn floorboards, and the acrid scent of ink and cedar clung in the hush. Judge Hastings rapped his gavel, voice clear as a canyon bell. We convene on Lila Hale versus Ezra Cole. Exhibit A, Forged Deeds. Sarah Reed stepped forward, ledger in hand. She laid brittle pages on the bench. Signatures carved in Colt's barrel ink. Sheriff Luke Vance's seal stamped beside Ezra Cole's scrawl. Lila swallowed against desert's dryness, as every gaze weighed her small frame like scales of justice. She pressed a gloved hand to her locket sage-leaf carving, memory of Mary's lullaby folding around her. The judge scanned each entry. Transfer of Tanner Ranch to Cole's name under threat of eviction. Payment by fear. Signed under duress. Holt's ledger lay open beside it, recording bribes extorted from helpless neighbors. Eli's chest tightened. He closed his fist around Colt's leather strap. Stand firm, he murmured, voice low as creek water through canyon. Lila watched shadows dance on Dr. Holt's scowling face, spectacles catching courthouse light like trapped stars. Sheriff Vance shifted in spurs, oath cracking beneath gold's weight. Vance caught his first witness. Bank clerk Greer, spectacles fogged with dust and zeal. He recited a fabricated ledger of debts owed by Tanner, accusing Eli of default and land theft. Lila's pulse stuttered as Hope's thread trembled. Eli lifted his chin, eyes steel beneath sun-worn whiskers. Lila pressed her locket to her chest. Sage leaf, carved star, tiny moon newly etched, bulwark of truth in her palm. Without words, Eli placed his hand atop hers, a silent vow echoing through oak beams. The judge set aside Greer's testimony and beckoned Lila. Child, speak. Her throat ached with fear's harsh rasp. She climbed onto the bench's edge, small boots scraping oak. In the hush she heard Mary's lullaby, peppermint breeze, mother's steady hum. Lila lifted her voice, trembling but clear. My mother gave me this locket before she died. She loved me in our land. She opened her palm, sage leaf, star, crescent moon. These papers were forged to steal a home. My mother never would have left me hungry or alone. Murmurs rippled through the benches. Judge Hastings closed his eyes and exhaled, gavel hovering. Dr. Holt sputtered protest. Sheriff Vance bristled. But the judge lifted a hand. We hear Ms. Reed next. Sarah stepped forward, voice steady as mesquite wind. She described Ezra Cole's threats, burning barns, seeding well with salt, forcing neighbors under his thumb. Each word cut deeper than bullets, revealing greed's true blade. Lila's chest eased beneath Sarah's courage. Judge Hastings leaned forward, cedar-scented breath drifting in tight silence. He tapped ledger pages, then rapped his gavel. Cole's deeds are null and void. This court restores the Tanner Ranch to its rightful owners. Furthermore, Sheriff Vance's badge is suspended pending misuse of office. Dr. Elias Holt, you stand accused of conspiracy and fraud. Deputy stepped forward. Cuffs clicked on Holt's wrists. Ezra Cole, pale and sputtering, was next brought before the judge. He swallowed threats as deputies led him away in chains. Outside, townsfolk gathered on dusty steps beneath canyon sun. Sarah and Jed Harper stood at the front. Lila and Eli emerged into sunlight's glare, oak beams behind them dissolving in midday haze. Dust's nicker echoed Hope Reborn. Lila pressed her locket to her lips in quiet prayer, tears bright as morning dew. Eli bowed his head, reciprocating silence's grace. Justice had found balance in Ledger's truth and a child's brave heart. Weeks later, Dawn found the pair back at a runaway windmill. Evening's oilcloth lamp replaced by sun's gilded promise. Lila stood before a low sage altar, cedar planks smoothed by time. She held the locket's wooden heart, tracing sage leaf star and crescent moon carved by her trembling hands. Eli stood behind her, hat in hand, whiskers silvered by time and gratitude. She pressed a locket into a bed of fresh sage blooms, each petal pressed with Mary's memory and her own endurance. As smoke from cedar curls spiraled skyward, Lila stepped into Eli's arms. She tilted her head back, voice soft as dust on wind. "Darling," the word hung in valley hush, bridge between two hearts. Eli's arms tightened, knot of sorrow and relief unspooling in that single syllable. Sky, the hawk, soared overhead, wings casting fleeting shadows over sagebrush and oak skeletons. Its cry echoed across Mesa's edge, herald of freedom's flight. Lila watched its ascent, chest warm beneath Eli's coat. She closed her eyes and heard Mary's lullaby one last time. Peppermint, cedar, love's promise. But on the ridge beyond, lanterns flickered like false stars. Cole's men gathering in darkened hush, hungry for vengeance. Lila's grip tightened around Eli's coat. They shared a breath that tasted of hope and fear's equal measure. Under dusty hollows' fading light, lanterns shimmered on ridgetops, a final test of courage and trust awaiting Lila Hale and Eli Tanner in Part 5's Dawn of Redemption. Sagebrush glowed under dawn's mercy, but Lila's locket trembled as lanterns closed in on the ridge. The ranch lay hushed beneath a lavender sky, windmills silent, corral gate still as a heartbeat. Lila pressed fingers to the carved crescent moon on worn wood, memory of mother's lullabies stirring in her chest. Hooves thundered twice, thrumming across dew, glazed grass. She pressed her back against barn's plank walls, breath hushed like cedar smoke. Today, they would stand for all they'd lost and all they gained. Eli Tanner emerged through barn doors, Winchester cradled against canvas coat, arm wrapped in flannel from Lila's locket, blanket. His eyes found hers, promise in steel's light. Stay strong. Lila swallowed fear like dust, slipping a stone from her pouch to load her slingshot. Thus the mare snorted, mane rippling in pale dawn. Lila slid into stirrup and mounted, heart's pulse echoing hoofbeats approaching. She swung up and urged us forward. Small rider, loyal mare, thunder against greed's advance. From the loft-shadowed eaves, Sarah Reed stood with rifle leveled at corral entrance. Jed Harper crouched beside her, Colt in hand, silent sentinel of shared history. Years ago, Eli had pulled Jed from a saloon brawl, saving bones and dignity in a single act of mercy. Now Jed returned that debt, aimed steady in dawn's glow. Lanterns bobbed on ridge, deputies loyal to Vance's promise of gold and land. The first rider burst through gate, shotgun leveled. Sarah's rifle cracked. Powder smoke curled like a widow's sigh as the shot struck saddle horn. Rider reeled, jingle of spurs fading in stunned retreat. Lila guided dust in wide arcs across pasture, flinging stones at riders closing in. Each thwack against saddle or boot sent men vaulting from horses, splintering dawn's calm. Dusk galloped beside Levi's grain bin, snorting in freedom's gasp. Lila laughed, a spark of defiance crackling through her bones. She felt Mary's lullaby in each swirl of sage, in every beat of mare's hooves. A third rider charged. Lila let sling fly and struck the man's coat. He staggered, rifle clattering to parched earth. Lila exhaled victory that tasted like peppermint and relief. Inside the barn, Eli handed shotgun to Jed and vetted Sarah's aim. His arm throbbed with dawn's wound, but his resolve glowed brighter than lantern light. He positioned himself at the doorframe, Winchester trained on the ridge where lanterns blinked. "Hold fast," he whispered into rising wind. Sarah nodded, cheekbone rigid beneath straw, dust. Jed gripped Colt, glancing to Eli with wordless honor. Lila circled past corral gate, urging dust to rear, tossing stones into fleeing boots. Gunfire echoed like broken oaths across dew-drenched fields. The posse faltered beneath rancher's stand and child's courage. Horses bolted into mesquite. Riders stumbled in tumble of spurs. Lanterns tripped and skidded, flickering false stars on hard ground. Ezra Cole's dark form loomed at ridge's crest, coat flapping in desert breeze. He spat curses, pistol raised. Lila rained dust beneath him, cloaked in dawn's glow. She let her final stone fly, hitting Cole's hat, and watched him reel backward, hat flying into dusty sage. He cursed, turning to mount and flee. Jed Harper let out a whoop and raced forward. Colt leveled at Cole's horse. The Baron skidded, rifle knocked from gloved hand. Jed's Colt cracked, horse rear and tossed Cole into rib. Spinning tumble. Dust whinnied in triumph as Lila urged her mare to the fallen Baron. Sarah Reed marched forward, rifle raised. Judge Hastings emerged behind her, deputies flanking with cuffs. Hastings's tall frame cast a long shadow of law. Ezra Cole, you're under arrest for conspiracy, assault, and land fraud, he intoned, voice rolling across corral like thunder's echo. Cole lay defeated, face slick with dust and shame. The ridge now empty, ranch breathed relief. Dawn's pink light stained cooper barrels and oilcloth flapping on porch. Lila leapt from dust back, fingers brushing thick mane. She crossed the barn loft and retrieved the wooden locket, heart carved with sage leaf, star, moon, and crescent. She carried it to the sage altar, cedar beams laid in ring, fresh blossoms pressed in circle. Lila knelt, breathing in sage's sweet sting. She placed locket in center and drew a final carving, a sun's rays etched around the heart. Each stroke was Mary's lullaby in wood's grain, redemption's promise in copper ink's fledgling dawn. Eli emerged with Sarah and Jed at his side. He knelt beside Lila, hand covering hers on the altar's rim. His voice, battered by pain and relief, whispered, "Well done." He brushed hair from her brow, tender gesture older than sorrow. Lila looked up, eyes shining with dawn's soft glow. She pressed the sun-carved locket into Eli's palm and whispered, "Darlinda." The single word bloomed between them like prairie rose, bridging childhood and fatherhood, grief and hope. Months later, the ranch thrived beneath cottonwood shade and windmill's steady spin. Lila led Dust across green pasture, basket of eggs in hand. Eli repaired fence rails. Sarah and Jed mended the pump. Judge Hastings visited at noon, shaking Eli's hand with nod of respect. Sheriff Vance, disgraced and stripped a badge, lingered in Dusty Hollow's jail. Ezra Cole's bartered wealth lay beneath townsfolk's rebuke. The 4 deeds book lay in the judge's docket, sealed as lesson in law's mercy. At dusk, Lila climbed the altar's rim, sage blossoms soft beneath her boots. Sky the hawk soared overhead, wings outstretched in freedomsome. Lila reached to hang the locket on a carved cedar nail above the altar. Turquoise and shell glimmered in lamplight's edge. She pressed hand to the sun's rays etched in wood, and closed her eyes, reciting Mary's lullaby as wind carried note to mesa rim. She opened eyes to find Eli at her side, heart anchored in saddle leather and cedar's warmth. Dust nudged her knee, seeking supper's grace. Sarah and Jed watched from corral gate, smiles bright as copper pennies. Lila inhaled sage, scented twilight, and released her breath like new dawn's first ripple. Under violet's closing sky, Lila pressed head to Eli's shoulder and murmured, "We endure," echoing strength born in trials past. The locket swayed above sage blooms, for carvings of love's legacy sealed in wood's grain. Sky's cry rose and faded into starlit promise. In that sigh of night, the ranch stood whole, bound by sacrifice, redemption, and a child's steadfast heart.